when 5 Just Stop Oil activists also stopped Les Mis being performed on Wednesday night. The crowd just booed them. Maybe a straw in the wind, but add that to sentiment to Rishi Sunak's edging back from some net zero policies, and somehow stopping global warming has turned into what they call a culture war issue. That's why green energy industrialist Dale Vince announced today he's pulling his funding of green protest groups, of which Just Stop Oil is the most high profile. He wants to focus instead on giving young voters the means to vote, and believes that further direct action is now playing into the Conservatives' hands. I spoke to him earlier and asked why he decided to pull the plug on his support for JSO.
It's very clear that more protests won't cause the government to change direction. I think the last couple of weeks we've seen them double and treble down on this issue. I mean, they've announced basically an anti-green agenda, a war on green wokery, hundreds of new licenses rather than stopping the handful that Just Stop Oil have been protesting against. And really, it's a recognition that more protests can't divert this government from the crazy course that they've chosen, which is an anti-green agenda.
So do you regret now having funded, I think, something like over £300,000, interrupting people going to sports events, to the theatre even, in the past week?
I don't regret it. I think it was the right thing to do at the right time. Protest has a role in our country. It was a peaceful protest. It did cause disruption. As I said back then many times, the more disruption you cause when you have a protest, the more effective that protest is. But now it's crystal clear that more protests can't change the course of this government. And we do have an election coming soon. It makes sense to adapt and say, OK, let's fight this issue at the ballot box.
But I mean, I think it's worth just reflecting. You know, we've had hundreds of people arrested, dozens of people have spent time in prison. There are some currently in jail. You know, and I kind of put it to you that you did encourage these protesters to act at the edge of legality. That has backfired, and you've kind of justified anybody with a different political persuasion to do similar things. You can't complain if someone who wants to stop the boats, for example, protests like this in a disruptive fashion.
Listen, I'm not sure why you're saying this to me. You know, we know what the recent history is. I did fund Just Stop Oil. I believed in the cause. I still believe in the cause, just not the method now. The tactic, I think, that's been turned against us as environmentalists. That it's been weaponized by the Conservative Party. We have an election coming. I want to now put my energy into something else, a different way to stop oil. The ultimate way to stop oil is to stop this crazy Conservative government.
Is this happening now because Labour have pressurised you because they see some of this connection with Just Stop Oil as being quite toxic for them ahead of an election? Isn't that the case?
No. No. I sound like I'm being cross-examined now by a barrister or something.
It's a reasonable question.
Nobody pressurizes me to do anything in my life. Right? They may try, but it doesn't work. This is completely my own decision, because if you look at it, it's a very simple, logical decision.
But I put it to you that actually from the Labour leadership now, we're getting a little bit of sort of rowing back on some of this agenda. You take the decision on Rosebank last week. It's pretty clear when you hear from the oil companies involved that had Labour put up any type of fight or any indication that they might look at these decisions, they wouldn't have made the investment. So literally, Keir Starmer could have stopped the oil, and he hasn't. He's going to let as many things go through before the election as might be needed.
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure that's true. I don't accept that. For one thing, the investment has been made. Actually, it hasn't been. Maybe a decision has been made to go ahead, but there's an awful lot of work that hasn't been done, investment that hasn't been made. I understand what Keir Starmer is doing when he says he won't break contracts that have been signed by the government. I mean, this week we've seen Rishi Sunak break contracts with the people that were working on HS2. It's going to cost us hundreds of millions of pounds. It erodes confidence in the government of our country for investors from here and from overseas. It's a bad look. It's a bad thing to do. So I understand it from that perspective.
And on their big green investment plan that was 28 billion a year, you know, they've sort of rode back a bit on that. They weren't exactly firm out of the blocks in terms of opposing all of the new green agenda of the government. They're playing it quite cautiously.
Yeah, they are playing it cautiously. I can see that too. Obviously, there's a fairly right-wing media bias in our country. If you look at the ownership of the print titles, 9 out of 11 are right-wing titles. And Labour are being careful about what they commit to ahead of the election, which also makes sense because they don't know the state of the finances now, like the government knows them, and they don't know what it's going to be like in maybe 12 months' time when there's an election. So it makes sense to be cautious.
Delvins, thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.